The sharp crack of a hand striking a face echoed across a crowded wedding ballroom, instantly silencing 200 wedding guests. The music stopped dead. In front of glowing crystal chandeliers, the bride stood over her groom's 62-year-old mother, her hand still raised in anger. "You ruined my dress, you worthless old woman!" she screamed. Loretta Johnson stood motionless, a red mark rising on her cheek, while her navy blue discount dress caught the glare of 100 cameras. The groom stood frozen, saying nothing. Loretta simply adjusted her modest pearls, turned around, and walked out into the cold night with unyielding dignity. But as she stepped onto the hotel driveway, 5 shiny black Escalades pulled into the valet line, and out stepped the billionaire owner of the hotel chain, holding a golden invitation from the woman they had just thrown away. At a luxury Dallas hotel, 62-year-old Loretta Johnson came for one simple reason: to watch her son start a new life. The Grand Meridian Hotel glittered like a jewel in the heart of downtown. Crystal chandeliers hung from the high ceiling in cascading layers of light. White roses overflowed from towering centerpieces, and servers in black uniforms moved silently between tables, carrying silver trays of champagne. More than 200 guests filled the room, wealthy corporate executives, attorneys, and socialites dressed in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. At the center of it all stood Ashley Carlisle, looking exactly like the bride she had always imagined becoming. Her satin gown shimmered beneath the lights, and diamonds sparkled around her neck. Across the room stood Marcus Johnson, tall, handsome, and nervous. But every few minutes, his eyes drifted toward a quiet table near the back corner where his mother sat alone. Loretta looked nothing like the wealthy guests around her. She wore a simple navy blue dress purchased from a department store sale weeks earlier. Her black shoes had been polished carefully that morning until they looked almost new. Loretta sat with perfect posture and a gentle smile. No one looking at her would have guessed how many years she had spent working 2 jobs before sunrise and after sunset as a hospital night cook. No one knew the sacrifices stitched into the quiet lines of her face, sacrifices that put her son through college and law school without a single debt. But Marcus knew, or at least he should have. Whenever their eyes met across the room, she smiled softly, ignoring the sideways glances and cold whispers from the bride's family. Around 8 o'clock, Loretta stepped away from her table to ask a server for a clean napkin. As she walked through the crowd, she passed near the head table where Ashley was talking loudly with her friends. Loretta offered a polite, warm smile, but before she could walk past, a server carrying a tray bumped against a guest's chair. A glass of dark red wine slipped, splashing across the front of Ashley's custom satin gown. The stain bloomed instantly across the pristine white fabric. Conversations died down. The band stopped playing. For 2 agonizing seconds, nobody in the room moved. Ashley looked down at her dress, her face twisting from shock into uncontrollable rage. But instead of looking at the server who had stumbled, her furious gaze locked directly onto Loretta, who was standing 2 feet away. "Look what you did!" Ashley shrieked, her voice echoing off the marble walls. "You clumsy, poor old woman! You did this on purpose because you couldn't stand seeing me in something you could never afford!" Loretta raised her hands calmly, keeping her voice soft and steady. "Ashley, dear, I didn't touch your glass. The server tripped behind us." "Don't call me dear!" Ashley snapped. Before anyone could react, Ashley stepped forward and delivered a hard, stinging slap across Loretta's face. The sound cracked through the silent ballroom like a gunshot. Gasps erupted across the tables. Loretta's head turned from the impact, her hand rising slowly to touch her reddening cheek. She did not cry out. She did not raise her voice. She looked at her son, Marcus, waiting for him to step in, to defend the mother who had given up her youth for him. But Marcus stood frozen, looking at his new bride's wealthy family, terrified of ruining his new social standing. He lowered his eyes and said absolutely nothing. Ashley grabbed Loretta's arm and shoved her toward the exit doors. "Get out of my wedding! You don't belong here, and you never did!" Loretta stood tall. She adjusted her modest string of glass pearls, smoothed the front of her simple navy dress, and looked her son directly in the eye one last time. "Congratulations on your wedding, Marcus," she said softly. With absolute dignity, she walked out of the ballroom alone. Loretta walked through the polished glass doors of the hotel lobby and stepped out onto the cold, rain-slicked driveway. Wind blew against her thin coat, but she refused to let a single tear fall. She had survived 30 years of hard labor, poverty, and sacrifice. She would not let arrogance break her spirit tonight. As she waited near the valet stand for a city bus, headlights flashed down the boulevard. A motorcade of 5 brand-new black Cadillacs pulled up to the main entrance. Security guards hurried out to open the doors of the lead vehicle. A tall, distinguished black man in his late 50s stepped out wearing a bespoke velvet tuxedo. Behind him came 3 assistants carrying leather portfolios and an expensive floral arrangement. It was Arthur Sterling, the billionaire founder of the Sterling Global Hotel Group, the very company that owned the Grand Meridian Hotel. Arthur adjusted his suit jacket and glanced toward the valet stand, where his eyes landed on the woman standing alone in the cold. He stopped in his tracks, his jaw tightening in disbelief. He walked quickly past his security team, stepping directly up to Loretta. "Mrs. Johnson? Loretta Johnson?" Arthur asked, his voice filled with deep respect. Loretta blinked, looking up into a face she hadn't seen in nearly 15 years. "Arthur?" Arthur Sterling took both of her hands in his, looking down at the faint red mark still visible on her cheek and her damp coat. 15 years ago, long before Arthur owned hotels or built a real estate empire, he was a struggling, broke young man sleeping in his car behind the hospital where Loretta worked the night shift. Every single night, without asking for anything in return, Loretta had brought him warm meals, fresh coffee, and words of encouragement, giving him the strength to keep fighting when the world turned its back on him. "Mrs. Johnson, why are you standing out here in the cold?" Arthur asked, her forehead furrowing. "I flew in from New York specifically to surprise you at your son's reception after receiving your note last month." Loretta gave a quiet, sad smile. "The reception is inside, Arthur, but I was asked to leave." Arthur's eyes narrowed instantly. "Asked to leave? By whom?" "My son's new wife," Loretta said quietly. "There was an accident with some wine, and she felt I didn't fit in with her guests." Arthur stood silent for 3 seconds, a powerful fury rising behind his calm demeanor. He turned to the hotel's chief general manager, who had rushed outside to greet the billionaire owner. "Who authorized the removal of this woman from my property?" Arthur demanded, his voice dropping to a terrifying register. The manager trembled, stuttering nervously. "Sir, the bride's father booked the main ballroom. They complained about an uninvited guest causing a disturbance." "Uninvited?" Arthur interrupted, his voice cutting through the night air like a whip. "Loretta Johnson is my honored guest. She is the reason I survived to build this entire company." Arthur turned back to Loretta and offered his arm with regal courtesy. "Mrs. Johnson, allow me to escort you back inside. It's time we remind these people whose house they're standing in." Inside the grand ballroom, the party had resumed. Ashley was sitting at the main table while her mother tried to dab the stain off her gown. Marcus was sitting beside her, looking miserable and staring at his glass. Ashley raised her champagne flute high, laughing loudly. "Now that the distraction is gone, let's toast to real elegance." Suddenly, the massive double doors of the ballroom crashed open, slamming against the walls. Every head in the room turned. Walking down the central carpet, flanked by 8 burly security officers, was Arthur Sterling. And walking right beside him, holding his arm with graceful composure, was Loretta Johnson. The bride's father, recognizing the famous billionaire immediately, hurried forward with a wide, fake smile, holding out his hand. "Mr. Sterling, what an honor! We had no idea you were visiting the Dallas property tonight." Arthur ignored the extended hand completely, stepping right past him to the microphone at the head table. The entire room went dead silent. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," Arthur spoke into the microphone, his voice echoing clearly across every corner of the vast room. "I am Arthur Sterling, owner of this hotel. I came here tonight to honor a woman who embodies true grace, sacrifice, and strength, Mrs. Loretta Johnson." Ashley's face turned white as snow. Marcus stood up from his chair, trembling. 15 minutes ago, a bride in this room laid her hand on Mrs. Johnson and ordered her thrown out like trash because of the clothes she wore and the color of her skin. Murmurs swept through the crowd of 200 guests. Socialites began whispering in shock. "Effective immediately," Arthur declared, "I am revoking the rental permit for this ballroom. The security staff will now escort the bride, her family, and anyone who stood by and watched that assault happen off my property." Arthur looked at the manager. "Cancel their accounts, shut down the catering, and file formal criminal assault charges with the Dallas Police Department on behalf of Mrs. Johnson." The bride's father gasped. "You can't do this. Do you know how much money I spent on this venue?" "Your money means nothing in a room where dignity was traded for cruelty," Arthur replied coldly. As security officers stepped forward to escort a sobbing, ruined Ashley and her humiliated family out into the rain, Marcus stepped toward his mother, tears streaming down his face. "Mom, I'm so sorry. Please." Loretta looked at her son for a long moment. She felt no hatred, only a quiet sorrow for the man he had chosen to become. She pulled her hands back gently. "I raised you to stand for what is right. Today, you chose silence." Loretta turned back to Arthur, smiled warmly, and walked out of the ballroom on her own terms, surrounded by the respect she had earned over a lifetime. True dignity is never given by money or high status. It is carried in the quiet strength of those who remain righteous, no matter how hard the world tries to break them.